This is Sarah. Now, she got her avoidant ex back twice. And this was despite the fact that he said,
I don't love you anymore. You're just, you're too much. We're never going to be together again. I heard all those things.
And again, he did this twice. I interviewed Sarah to learn exactly what traits her avoidant ex found attractive. And I learned that she unknowingly exhibited 6 specific characteristics that likely attracted her avoidant ex back to her. Now, Sarah started this journey trying and failing for months. Then she learned a fundamental secret about avoidance and did one thing that would change everything.
The biggest thing that helped was, honestly, it really was the best thing that I could have done.
Let's start first, though, at the beginning. Trait number 1, the unconscious draw to anxious partners.
Because my biggest thing is that I'm not a very mellow person. I'm very high strung. And so I actually go to a therapist to kind of help me with my own problems, and he's working on his. So we're doing really, really well, actually. Because I hate to say it, but I think the breakup was the best thing for us.
Now, you're probably sitting here and thinking this is a really odd trait to start with. After all, don't avoidant hate high-strung or anxious people? Well, when I say that their relationship with anxious individuals is a love-hate relationship, I mean it literally. Look at this. This is an excerpt from an article from Psychology Today written by Stephanie A. Sarkis. She says that the attraction between these two attachment styles can stem from their unconscious desire to fulfill unmet emotional needs from childhood. Now, we know from attachment theory that typically from a young age, individuals who develop an avoidant attachment style often experience rejection of their emotional needs by caregivers. And this can manifest in various different ways, such as a parent dismissing a child's tears with remarks like, "Boys don't cry, man up." Or it can be even more subtle by not responding adequately to the child's emotional expressions or sadness or need. Now, here's the wild part. According to the National Library of Medicine, genetic research indicates that up to 45% of the variability in anxious and 39% in avoidant adult attachment style can be explained by genetic causes. So while some avoidant attachment style can be chalked up to genetics, most avoidance in adults is the result of circumstance. I say this because a huge indicator of what your attachment style will be is going to be a result of your actual relationship with your caregiver. And part of why this is because the insecurely attached caregiver reinforces the wrong types of behavior. For example, a parent with an avoidant attachment style might give positive attention when their child is happy, but withdraw or try to change the child's mood during very vulnerable moments. Now, this avoidance stems from the parent's own internal discomfort with their own vulnerable emotions, which ultimately leads them to reject similar emotions in their child. As a result, the child learns to associate vulnerability and emotional needs with a negative response, like disgust. Now, this response becomes an unconscious part of their psyche, which leads them to feel a self-disgust whenever they start to experience their own vulnerabilities later in life. They are essentially conditioned to believe that showing vulnerability will lead to rejection or disgust, a belief that deeply influences their emotional interactions and attachment style, again, in adulthood. Yet, deep down, the avoidant knows that they're missing something. Let's go back once more to that Psychology Today article. An avoidant partner may seek the need for intimacy their partner possesses because they think they are missing out on a crucial part of intimate relationships. And they're kind of right. The avoidant is seeking what was denied them in childhood. But again, as the Psychology Today article points out, what each partner seeks can also cause their undoing. What attracts us to another person also tends to gnaw at us over time, which is why I say anxious and avoidant relationships is literally a love-hate relationship. The avoidant individual is unconsciously drawn to the anxious individual. And it's all because they know that the anxious individual has something that they're lacking. It's the intimacy that they were denied as a child by their caregivers. But the problem is that an avoidant person's conditioning never allows them to get close enough to experience true intimacy. Trait number 2, having a partner willing to respect independence.
I actually bought my first house at 20 all by myself. And luckily
Props.
his name wasn't on it.
Yeah.
It was just me. But we bought a dog together and literally went the whole 9 yards. We've been together for 2.5 years. And all of a sudden, like, we just moved into this house, like, 3 months ago, and he's like, I'm not happy, I'm leaving.
So the thing that really struck me about my interview with Sarah, she said that it was only after buying a house and moving in together that her avoidant ex freaked out. Now, I've talked at length about this idea of insecure core wounds. The TLDR, though, is that every single insecure attachment has what I consider a core wound that triggers them. Now, a core wound is essentially something that will trigger an insecure attachment's core coping mechanisms. For an anxious person, it's the fear of being abandoned. For an avoidant person, it's the fear of losing independence. For a fearful avoidant person, they have both core wounds. But here's where some nuance comes into play with the core wound concept. Every single avoidant has a different threshold of what they're willing to endure before they get triggered. Look at this. This is a list of some of the most common trigger points that I can think of. Texting romantically, talking on the phone romantically, going on a date, asking to be official, getting a dog together, moving in together, getting engaged, getting married, buying a house, having children. Do you notice a trend here? They all revolve around commitment of some form, which is a direct assault on an avoidant's core wound of losing their independence. So in Sarah's case, she got about right here before her ex gets triggered. This is her ex's threshold. Every avoidant has their trigger limit. For some, they can maybe make it to the having children phase before they get triggered. For others, they maybe get triggered when you ask them to be official in a relationship. Now, the obvious question here is when you look at this gigantic list, how the heck do you get through it all without triggering them? Well, I think that's answered by looking at the old parable of how you boil a frog. See, the story goes like this. If a chef puts a frog in boiling water, then the frog will detect the heat and immediately jump out of the pot. But if the chef puts the frog in the water that isn't boiling, but slowly turns the heat up, the frog won't detect it, and voila, you've got yourself a cooked frog. Just one problem. Scientifically, this isn't true. No matter what, the frog will jump out of the pot. But for the sake of this discussion, let's pretend that it is, because this concept works incredibly well on humans. The problem Sarah had with her avoidant was she moved through this list way too quickly. If she had just slowed down to convince her avoidant that he wasn't going to lose his independence, she might have seen better results. Trait number 3, avoidants want what they can't have.
You or whatever's going on, there's always still hope because let's face it, guys want what they can't have.
Now, in addition to interviewing Sarah, I also interviewed Dr. John Paul Garrison, who is a clinical and forensic psychologist based out of Georgia. He also runs the very popular YouTube channel Dr. G Explains, where he basically dissects the body language of all sorts of bad people. Anyways, he said something really interesting in our interview.
We may discuss this a little bit more as we go. When you think about avoidant is anxiety, really, because anxiety is built around the concept of avoidance. We can't be anxious and not avoid. It just comes with the territory.
So his argument, which I think is correct, is that avoidants have all these coping mechanisms in place to deal with anxiety. In fact, pretty much every insecure attachment style does. It's just that avoidants have all this machinery in place to keep people at an arm's length. They've basically built up this wall to keep people from getting close to them. And we've already talked a little bit about why that is. They're caregivers. But what Sarah hits on here, they want what they can't have, is a lot more profound than you might initially believe. Take a look at this. This is the book Attached's definition of the Phantom X. One of the consequences of devaluing your romantic relationship is that you often wake up long after the relationship has gone stale, having forgotten all the negative things that annoyed you about your partner, wondering what went wrong and reminiscing longingly about your long-lost love. We call this the Phantom X phenomenon. So let's play a little game. An avoidant is given two options: a relationship with a human being who wants a deeper commitment, or a fantasy with a human being they used to be with, but asks no deeper commitment of them. Which do they prefer? Obviously, they're going to prefer the fantasy. Not only is it unattainable, which helps them keep their independence, but this constant yearning for the Phantom X forms the foundation for the wall they're going to put up to guard their heart. It's all part of that coping strategy that Dr. Garrison mentioned. Trait number 4, the contrast effect.
I went out, bought new clothes. I actually dyed my hair, put in extensions, and like he noticed me right off the bat because I was posting pictures. And that's when
so you're doing it on like Facebook or social media or things like that?
Instagram, Snapchat. Like I was posting this stuff all the time, and he was noticing it.
Now, Sarah hits on something here that isn't talked about a lot, and that is the contrast effect. Now, I see a lot of breakups in my line of work. And a lot of times you hear the same types of phrases being thrown around by exes as the cause of the breakup. Boring, too stable, complacent. Let me decode what's really happening here. Look at this. This is my stability and mystery scale. You see, we human beings are quite complicated individuals. On the one hand, we want stability, and on the other hand, we want mystery. Yet these two qualities are completely opposites from one another. What often happens in relationships is that at the beginning of a relationship, an avoidant falls in love with someone based on the stability and mystery ratio. For example, maybe you have a 60-40 ratio, 60% mystery and 40% stability. Another person they could fall for has a 50-50 ratio, 50% mystery and of course 50% stability. Whatever the ratio is doesn't really matter. Because from what I've observed, the same phenomenon ultimately occurs. The fluid nature of the stability and mystery scale naturally causes the ratio to change over time. So maybe what started out as a 50-50 split slowly starts to tip in favor of stability so that by the end of a relationship, things might look like this. 70% stability and 30% mystery. And the avoidant, when this happens internally, is going, wait, hold up here. This is not what I signed up for. This is not the person that I fell in love with. And this actually contributes to the avoidant's overall perception of you. And here's where we come back to that clip I played of Sarah. She says she went out and
bought new clothes. I actually dyed my hair, put in extensions, and like he noticed me right off the bat because I was posting pictures.
Bought new clothes, dyed her hair, put new extensions in. All of this creates a type of contrast. But as I was listening to her talk, an alarming thought came to mind. A few weeks ago, I filmed a video on narcissism. And in that video, I asked one simple question. Are all avoidants narcissists? The answer, of course, was very nuanced, but here's where I landed. Grandiose narcissism will be a stronger predictor of the avoidant attachment dimension in relationship to vulnerable narcissism. Now, if you want to look at what the difference is between grandiose narcissism and vulnerable narcissism, I highly recommend you check out that video. But here's the important bit for this discussion. There is a definite link between narcissism and avoidant behavior. However, I would say that most avoidants aren't full-blown narcissists. Rather, they just exhibit some narcissistic traits. And one of those traits might actually explain what was happening to Sarah here. Okay, so check this out. This is the narcissistic abuse cycle. And as you can see, narcissistic relationships often follow a pattern of idealization followed by devaluation. This, of course, led Sarah's avoidant ex to eventually discard her. What I think happened here is that Sarah's transformation makes her appear new or improved, and her avoidant ex, who exhibits some narcissistic traits, might experience a rekindling of the idealization phase, seeing Sarah as desirable and perfect again, and that is why he's all of a sudden interested again. The contrast is so obvious that he's just pulled in like a moth to flame. Trait number 5. Competition.
I was posting this stuff all the time, and he was noticing it. And it wasn't until I started hanging out with other guys and like actually attempting to date other people that I got a reaction from.
I also noticed Sarah said something particularly interesting about dating other people. She actually dated her avoidant ex's best friend before him.
His best friend was like,
oh, we always had like a thing for you or something?
No, to be honest, I actually dated his best friend before.
Now, why does this work? Why do avoidants find this attractive? Well, I think it's the interplay between 3 things: safety and unavailability, fear of intimacy, and the challenge in competition. Let's tackle safety and unavailability first. Check this out. According to Free to Attach, avoidants are free to long for an ex once that person is unavailable, out of a relationship, and typically out of context, so they are untouched by the actual engagement and their deactivation systems aren't triggered. Gosh, I'm so tired of saying that. But it's true. For avoidant individuals, attraction to someone unavailable provides a safe distance. They're untouched by true intimacy. We actually covered this in that Phantom X phenomenon already. Anyway, since the person they're not attracted to isn't available anymore, there's this built-in barrier that prevents them from getting too close, which aligns with the avoidant's insatiable need to maintain distance. Now let's talk about fear of intimacy. Avoidant individuals obviously fear intimacy and the vulnerability that it brings. Being attracted to someone who is taken means there's less risk of a deep, intimate connection developing, which can feel safer for someone with an avoidant attachment style. It's all there in the machinery. Remember, you can explain most of an avoidance behavior by simply looking at their core wound, their insatiable need for independence, and their protection of that concept. Unconsciously, they are attracted to individuals for which they know the relationship is doomed. This keeps them safe. And then, of course, we have challenge and competition. Some avoidant individuals will be drawn to someone for the challenge of it, for the thrill of the chase. And it's even better if they're competing against someone. They see it more as a game of conquest rather than seeking a genuine connection. But why compete? Well, we kind of alluded to it already, the thrill of the chase. When I was in high school, I had a friend who was obsessed with the thrill of the chase. And quite frankly, he was a combination of the two worst factors you could imagine. He was avoidant and good looking, which means he unknowingly and maybe a little bit knowingly victimized girls. It was always the same pattern. He'd get obsessed with a girl, chase after them, win their hearts, bask in a mini honeymoon period, and then the moment that honeymoon period wore off, he'd drop the girl and move on to the next one. I never asked him why he was doing this, but I didn't have to. One day he just volunteered it. He said, and I quote, "There's nothing like that moment in time at the beginning of a relationship before it gets too serious." Now, I've often accused avoidants from jumping from one relationship to another simply for the honeymoon period, and it seems that was what my friend was doing as early as high school. But there's another layer here I haven't really covered. My friend would actually like it if we both liked the same girl. I didn't, of course, because the girls always chose him. But he reveled in it to the point that I wouldn't tell him when I'd like a girl. But this goes directly into that challenge and competition aspect. Trait number 6, space.
I don't know, the biggest thing that helped was honestly the no contact rule. It really was the best thing that I could have done.
From Sarah's lips to your ears. In my opinion, this is the one thing that she did that changed everything for her. She did a no contact rule. She gave her avoidant space. It seems so simple, right? Well, it's actually not. More on that in a moment. Now, this shouldn't come as a shock to anyone. I've made countless videos on this topic on my YouTube channel and kind of explained why avoidants find it so attractive. Ultimately, though, it boils down to one simple fact. The most common pairing we see is an anxious and an avoidant getting into a relationship together. Actually, wait a minute. Let's visualize this a little bit differently. Imagine you have two people in a relationship. One that's avoidant, one that's anxious. Now, each of these people has a battery. When the battery is full, they're feeling great. When it's low, they don't feel so great. So you have these two people in relationships, but what fills their batteries up are two different things. For the avoidant, they need space to recharge and feel that they still have their independence. For an anxious partner, they'd need reassurance to feel that they aren't going to be abandoned. Notice how each of these battery fill-ups have a lot to do with their core wounds. Anyways, at first, everything is great. The honeymoon period's going strong, the avoidant is giving some reassurance, the anxious person isn't being overbearing because they are getting reassurance. But just like I said earlier, once the honeymoon period wears off, that's when things begin to go downhill. The avoidant partner's battery begins to dissipate first. They usually start to nitpick at something the anxious person did. This causes the anxious partner's battery to begin to deplete, which in turn causes the anxious partner to naturally search for the one thing it knows is going to replenish their battery: reassurance. Of course, every time that the anxious person seeks reassurance, the avoidant person's battery depletes, so that in the end you have both partners with depleted batteries. Now let's compare that to what Sarah did. She labels herself as an anxious individual. You can see that here.
Because my biggest thing is that I'm not a very mellow person. I'm very high strung. And so I actually go to a therapist to kind of help me.
However, she goes against what her anxiety is telling her to do. She gives her avoidant ex space. This allows his battery to fill back up, which is why she starts getting these types of results.
Recently, that was when he was FaceTiming me. That was when my phone was constantly getting blown up. Second day, he called me 6 times. Literally called me 6 times, and I didn't answer anything. Left me voicemails. Pick up your phone. And
space is the single most important thing to give to an avoidant. It's the single most important thing that they think is attractive, and a lot of times they don't even know why it's attractive. But let's hold up for a moment here. I've just taken you through the 6 major traits that avoidants find attractive, but there's something really bothering me about this. Why are these people even worth attracting? After all, I did end up interviewing Sarah a second time. And guess what? This was after the avoidant ex that I interviewed her the first time on had broken up with her again. Of course, she moved on to someone else, which of course drove her avoidant ex even crazier, and he was begging for her back once more, but that's beside the point. Should you care about attracting these individuals? Or, as many people in the comments section of my YouTube channel say, should you avoid them like the plague? I think the most important question to answer here is why? Why do you want an avoidant ex back? Is it because you're afraid of being alone? Is it because you believe that the relationship can improve if you have a better understanding of what each person needs? To be honest with you, I'm not sure that I can give you any kind of answer in this video that is going to satisfy you. Here's what I'll say. The most important thing to give to an avoidant is space. But it's how you use that space, that time away, that matters most. What you should be doing is finding something that you care about just as much as the avoidant, so you can have your own contrast effect. So you can actually take off the rose-colored glasses and look at the avoidant and ask yourself, why? And it's in that frame of mind that you can actually make an educated decision.